Alright, welcome back to another web development video where I show you how to make modern websites using HTML5, CSS3, and a little bit of JavaScript. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to make sort of a slide up footer menu. So we're going to have a sort of an anchored footer menu here. That's, as you scroll, it's going to stay attached to the bottom. And we're going to use position sticky for that. So we're not going to use position fixed. We're going to try something new. And then when you click on each of the icons, it's going to have a menu that slides up and sort of goes over the main content, but it goes between the menu and the main content. And then it'll have just some text or whatever you want on that menu. It could be links. And so I'll show you how to do that. And then for each one, I'll show you how to do the more application way, and then the one where we put the different panels inside of the HTML itself. So all we have right now is just this main content with the chapter heading and some text. Just needed some content to fill this out so that we could scroll. And so right now we need to build out our menu first. For those who don't know, I typically write in Pug. You can do this in HTML. All Pug does is like Sass for your HTML, so it outputs regular HTML in the end. But this sort of looks like the original version of Sass, not SCSS. So it has the indents and all that kind of stuff. You'll get the hang of what I'm doing. Nothing is too overly complicated. And I also have I have this material design iconic font loaded for the font icons, and then I also have jQuery that's loaded in. We use the jQuery to switch classes so that we can open and close our menu. So the first thing that we have is a nav, and we're just going to call this footer nav. And then we'll have footer nav inner. Actually, we can make that an ID, probably be the only one on the page. And then inside the footer nav inner, we'll have the footer nav menu, and this will be an unordered list. And then inside of that, we'll have our footer nav menu items, and this is going to be where we put all of our icons. So let's just copy and paste that down a couple times. So we'll have 4, and so there'll be 4 across here. And let's go ahead and get our icons. So we find this is the URL where you can find the material design iconic font, and you can probably look it up this way. If you want to put it into your application and you're using a code editor, there's a link here that you can import it from a CDN. And once you have it all connected up, then you can come and just grab the icons. So let's first go with something like a book collection. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it in to the LI, and you'll see it gets in down here. And let's also do maybe a person for an account. So maybe it's something personal or an account section. And let's do what else would be good? Maybe favorites. And one more. Maybe some sort of about. So, like a help. Okay. So now we have. Oh. Well, that's not what we wanted. Now we have all of our icons down here for our footer, and you can see them all here. So we have the collection of books, sort of a my account, favorites, and then maybe a help or about type of section. Okay, so that's really all that we need for our footer section. So let's go ahead and just do the CSS for that. You can see I already have a little bit of padding attached to the main. That just keeps it off of the edges a little bit. And what we want to do is we want to say footer nav. With the background color of black. Actually, let's make it a little bit less than black. And then the color is going to be a little bit less than white, a little darker than white. So you can see down here, it's not quite white and it's not quite black. A little bit more sophisticated color scheme. The next we need to do our footer nav menu. I'm just going to copy that and come down, and for this we want to say list style of none, and this should get rid of our bullet points. And then we're going to say padding equal to 0, and that should push it over. And we're also going to make this display flex. So if you've never used Flexbox before, this is how you make a container a flex container. So essentially it takes all of these items that are children of this container and it lines them up, not stacked vertically like this, but it lines them up next to each other. You can see that display block is the original initial state for these because a list item is a block level element. But display flex makes them sort of an inline block type of element. So it lines them up next to each other, and then we get some other fun properties. So we say justify content, and we can say centered, which is not what we want, or we can say space around, which evenly spaces them out across the space. It spaces them all these elements. It spaces out these elements across this space. So this space is 100% wide, so it spaces it out all the way across the bottom of the page. And that's not exactly what we want, although that one is okay. I like to use space between, which takes them and pushes the first and the last all the way to the edges, and then it spaces everything else in between evenly. And then we're going to come into our footer nav inner, and we'll just put a little spacing, a little bit of padding into that. So now you have this nice padding. It's actually maybe we should put it here. Same, either way, same. And then I want to make sure I make these a little bit bigger. So we go into the footer nav menu item and we look at the I element, and we're going to make that font size of 1.5 rem. So just make those a little bit bigger than what they are. You could go full on 2 rem if you wanted to. That's probably okay. You start to get a little bit squished when you get down to smaller sizes. But it's not too bad. That 2 rem is probably okay. Alright, so we have our menu in place, and now we need to make our menu sticky, so you can see that when we scroll it's down at the bottom of the page. Now this position sticky is not in it's not universally accepted yet, although it's in most major browsers. So let's see, position sticky. So it's not in Opera Mini or BlackBerry or IE Mobile. So you can see that it's not fully supported here. But it is fully supported in new Firefox, Safari, and mostly in Chrome, but only newer versions of Chrome. There's partial support. So this is, I'm showing you something that's a little bit advanced, and hopefully we'll build a fallback into it and see if the fallback will work too. So this is the element that we want to put that on. So the way we can do this is we can say if you want to, if you're finding a feature like this that is it's obviously, you know, it's globally supported in some ways, but in other ways it's not. Let's see. Because what we're seeing is it's fully supported in Firefox. It's partially supported here. Not supported on tables. Enabled through the experimental web platform features. So you can see where there's a flag. That means it's behind a flag. Known issues. But we'll use it and we'll see if we can create a backup too. So if there's a feature that's not fully supported by all the browsers yet, one thing you can do is use a feature query. And so just like in doing a media query, we say things like at media and then whatever. For a feature query, we say at supports, and then we have to say whatever we want to support. Position sticky. So if the browser supports position sticky, then it will use the code that comes after this. If not, it'll use the code that we write before. So it sort of cordons it off and keeps the browser from reading it if it doesn't support it. So this is one way to, so when we were first doing CSS Grid before it was fully brought into all the browsers, this was one way of making sure that you get the grid display whenever the browser supports grid. Otherwise it would do whatever else you want to do. So as supports position sticky, we're going to say footer nav position sticky. And then when we do this, it's similar to doing absolute positioning or fixed positioning. So it pulls it out of the flow of the document in some ways. It's sort of in between relative and absolute, or absolute and fixed, I guess. And so we have to declare, if we say top of 0, then it's going to put it should fix it to the top. Let's see. I haven't actually done this with the supports media query or feature query. So let's do position top. Well, why isn't this working now? That's a good question. So I had this in a previous video, a previous pen. So let's just take a look at that pen. Maybe I'm missing something on the position sticky. This is the one we're actually working on. So let's just take a look at it and figure it out. So the footer nav, we have a position of sticky. There it goes. Oh, I don't know what was wrong with that, but it's very strange. So let's try to go back and do our at supports position sticky. So it's just telling us maybe that it's not supporting that. Got a lot of traffic maybe on the internet here, so weird. So if we say bottom, that works. If we say top, maybe we have to do the Z index. See if that makes a difference. No. Well, I thought I understood how position sticky works. Maybe it has to do with its position in here, because what it's doing is it's not removing it necessarily from the flow of the container. So you can see that position inside the HTML is where position sticky matters. Position fixed, it doesn't matter. It takes it fully out of the flow of the document, and you can just put it wherever you want to put it. So we want ours to be a footer menu, so we're going to put it back down at the bottom. So that means that what would happen is, let me show you. In order for this to stick to the top, I think we'd have to do this. And let's see if it'll stick to the top. Yeah, you see how that works. So it keeps everything in the position and the order that it's in the HTML, so in the document. Right now we have our position sticky at the top. We don't need that. And we don't really need this either, I don't think. We'll see. And so when it gets to the here, then you can see that it adds that position sticky to the top, because it's sticking to the top at 0. If you change this to 100 pixels, then it will be that it sticks 100 pixels from the top. Okay, so if you want it to be at the top of the viewport, you just have to do 0. And then it'll stick to the top of the viewport for as long as you want it, as long as you go past it. But if you go this way, then you can see that it unsticks. So this is a sort of a powerful new type of thing where you can have headers that get sticky, and then maybe if there's another header that comes up here, when it meets it, this one unsticks and then the other one sticks. So sort of an interesting thing that's only been available mostly in JavaScript at this point. So let's try this with our bottom. So what we want to do is we want to stick it to the bottom, and so you can see nothing happens here because we're not sticking it to the bottom. We have to do that. So this is sort of the reverse effect. So before it gets to this element, it sticks to the bottom, but once we get to the element, it unsticks and then keeps going in the flow. Okay, so it's only when the bottom of this element meets 0 that it sticks, which is what we want. We don't have anything else after this, so if we want to stick it to the bottom, we should just make sure it's the last element, so that everything above it up here is going to cause this to stick, because the bottom is always going to be at the bottom of the page. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Position sticky is sort of fun to work with. You can do lots of different things with it all over the page based on the scroll, and doesn't require any sort of JavaScript really to make it work. So we're going to put this on here, and what I want to do also as a fallback maybe is position of fixed, and this should have a similar thing. You can see that it also fixes it to the bottom. It fixes it to the bottom of the viewport, which is what we want, but not what we want necessarily. So we have this, and maybe position sticky is going to be a fallback. We'll see. We'll test that in a browser maybe at the end and see if that works, because there are obviously browsers here, maybe IE 11. It's not supported. I don't have any of these other browsers available, but you know, this is mostly supported in lots of different browsers, so it's going to pick up this position sticky. Maybe even if I do that, it won't matter. So I already have it declared once that it's bottom of 0. Alright, so we'll hope that that works in other browsers. Let's sort of move on and keep going with what we have here. So we have our sticky navigation at the bottom. It's always going to be persistently there. If we look here, let's make this the live version, so it auto updates when we make our changes. Okay, so we have our sticky menu at the bottom, and what we want to do is when we click on these menu icons, we want another it's a panel really between this information and this menu. We want it to slide up, and we want it to have a little close button so that when we click the X, then it slides back down, and then when we click on this one, another panel slides up, and the panel should be specific to each of these things. So there should be maybe a bookshelf, an account, favorites, and help. So we'll call them that. So we need to build out those menus as well. So we're going to say, we can also call these a nav. We're gonna call them a panel first, so that we need a universal class. But this one is going to be an ID of bookshelf, and then it's going to have a class of panel, and then we say panel inner, and then panel header. This will be like an H2, and then the panel header, the first one is going to be bookshelf. And we should be able to see that down here, because we haven't pulled it out of the flow of the page yet. So we have our bookshelf, and then let's say we just have a UL with a bunch of items. So so item 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we just have a few items here in our bookshelf, and we're just going to sort of leave it rough at that, and we'll do some basic modifications here. We'll just put a little bit of padding on it. That's actually going to be 0. And then for our list items, we'll say a margin of 1 rem. Okay. Let's do 1 rem and 0. So we'll get rid of the margin on the left. So we have a little bit of space spread out here. So this is just going to show up. We need to put a close button on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say my material design icons. Go to web application. There's a few different closes here, so I'll just use this basic X. And then we can just say P panel close, and then we put that on there, and then you can see we have a little X on here. We'll make our our panel close, we'll say margin of 0, and because it's a P element, so we're just taking all the padding off of that, or the margin off of that. And then can we text align it to the right? And then we'll change the fonts of that font size to match all the others. So we have an even icon font size here. Makes it easy to see, easy to click. And I think we need to look at our panel, and we need to say we want the height of the panel to be 100 viewport heights, so you can see that it's the size of the viewport height. And we can put a width on it, but not necessary. It might actually mess things up, so let's see. Yeah, that's not going to be necessary. And then what we want to do is we want to make this panel position fixed, and then we want the top to be 0, and we want the left to be 0. We are going to have to put a width on here, width of 100%. And then we want the background of this to be a particular color, so we'll say this light gray color. And we have our footer nav is going to be a Z index of 100. Main is going to be a Z index, well, it's already a Z index of 1 or 0, I believe. And so we just need this to be inside of that. I ran into this before. Should I go here? No. It was where I put the padding. So instead of putting the padding on the panel, let's put it on panel inner. Okay, there we go. That way we don't lose our X up here. Ran into that before when I was working with this. Same thing. So we have everything sort of situated here. So when we click on this icon, what we want this panel to do is come up into place where it is right now. And then when we click this, we want it to go back down. Now this is the final position that we want this to be in. So whenever we choose active, that's the position that we want it to be. But how do we push this off of the page, left to right or top to bottom? Easiest way that I can think to do it in a CSS way is to come down and use the transform translate. And so we want to translate it along the y-axis, and we want to push it down 100%. So we want that thing to go all the way down. So you can't see it because it's position fixed, so it's out of the flow of the document, and it pushes it all the way down. It's sitting, the top of it sitting right here. You just can't see it because one, it's hidden behind this menu, but two, it's all the way down past the bottom edge of the viewport. That's what translate does. Translate pushes an element around the page, and it pushes it. If you use translate X, then it would push it all the way to the right side of the page here. So you can see if we just do 50%, you can see that it takes it from that top left and it pushes it over 50%. So 60%, 70%, 80%. So you can see that once you get to 100%, it's pushed it all the way to the left side of the viewport. So we don't want to translate it along that axis, we want to translate it along this axis. So again, you can see it's pushed it down 50% of the viewport, and again you can do 60, 70, 80, 90, and then 100 is what we want to do. So we're pushing it all the way down so that the top edge is here. So that's how transform translate works. If you want to push something down and over at the same time, you would use translate, and then you would say, you know, 50, 50%, 50%, which should put the corner of it somewhere over here. So it pushes it 50% down, 50% over, and puts the corner, the top left corner, right in the middle of the page. So that's how you would do if you want to translate both. I believe this is the X. Okay, so that's the X-axis, and then this one is the Y. So you can see it changes it. But for our purposes, we want to translate Y, and we want it to go down 100%. If we wanted it to come in from the top down to the bottom, then we would translate it minus 100%, so that would push it up. And likewise, if you did translate X and you did minus 100, it would push it to the left. So it takes that edge and it says negative if we're going to move it this way. So just a little primer there on transform. And we can use this in order to push things off of the canvas so that we can pull them onto the canvas through animation. So what we want to do is when we click this, we want this translate Y, we want it to equal 0. So you see whenever I make it 0, it pulls it right back up into its original position. This is the original place that it was. But we want it to go from that, and when we click here, click, and then so when we click, then this comes into position, and then we click on this, then it pushes it back down. So that's what we're going to try to do with our jQuery. So the first thing we want to do is we want to grab this icon when it's clicked. It's called footer nav menu item. It's a little bit verbose. And we say on, click. We want to do something. We want to run a function. And that function is going to say we need to add an active class to this panel. So the way we would do that in SAS is we come down, we indent, and we say and dot active. And so whenever it looks like this, panel dot active, so that's essentially what we're saying. So this is panel dot active. So when we have that situation, when active is added to panel, then we're going to take this transform and just copy that, and not 100%, we want it to be 0. So when it's active, it translates it back up to 0, which we already saw, brings it all the way back to the top. And then when active is taken off, then it goes back to the 100%, so it should push it all the way down. So what we need to do is we need to add that active class to the panel. So we look at the panel, we find the panel, and we say add class of active, and then that should work. So let's see. Okay, so you can see that it brought our panel from down here all the way up to here. And then we need to, when we click on this X, we need to sort of reverse that process. We need to take the panel and we need to remove the class of active. So I'll just copy this all, and we want to say footer or panel close. Then we take the panel and we remove the class of active. So it should go up, and then when we click here it should go down. So now we have an active menu. This works. It's not the best thing in the world because it jumps. We can easily add an animation to this by coming up to not the active but the parent. So whatever, this is the thing, this is the value that's being changed, but we go up to I don't know how to say it. You don't put the animation here on the value that's being changed. You put it on the element that's being changed. So then we say transition, and this is an easy way to just do a one-way animation. I'll show you how to do an actual animation with multiple properties on it. So we can say transition, and we're looking at the transform property, and we want it to take 500 milliseconds to transition from 100% to 0%, and vice versa, from 0 to 100%. It's going to take 1/2 of a second. You can write that as 500 milliseconds, you can write it as 0.5 seconds. Either one is the same, it's the same thing. And then we're going to use an ease in, ease out, and we're also going to say forwards. Forwards means actually we don't need that. We don't need that for a transition. We'll use that on the animation property. So we're going to look at the transform property, and when transform changes, then over 500 milliseconds it's going to apply that change, and it's going to use an ease in, ease out. So it'll have a nice smooth animation. So now when we click, we see that it slides in, and when we click this, it'll slide out. Okay, so we have a nice little slide transition. And let me show you how to do that as an animation. We can use the animation property as well, and we can do a couple things. So we'll try to fade it in as it comes up. So let's say we got to build our animation, so we say at keyframes, and we'll say slide in, slide up. And so at 0% we want it to be somewhere, and at 100% we want it to be somewhere. So this is the beginning of the animation, this is the end. So where do you want it to start? Where do you want it to end? We want it to start here. So we'll do our translate first. So we're going to start here, and then we want it to end at 0. And what else do we want it to? We want it to fade in. So we want it to start at opacity of 0. And when it ends, we want the opacity to be 1. And so now we need to take this animation here, and we need to apply it to this active class. And we say animation, slide up, and we want it to take 500 milliseconds, and we want it to ease in, ease out. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take these off. So I'm getting an error somewhere. It's a weird error. At keyframes? Okay. I didn't have the right one. At keyframes of slide up, and then we'll push this down. So let's see if that works. Okay. This is the one where we need to do forward. You see how it did the animation, but it pushed everything back to the original. So if you add the word forwards to this animation, then it'll actually make it stop. So once the animation stops, wherever this 100%, whatever this is, it'll stop there. So you can see that there's a fade in plus a slide up. And that doesn't reverse it. So to reverse it, we would need to add like a slide down in order to do that. So you would have to create a little bit more. It's a little bit more work to do that. If all you want is just one single thing for it to slide up and slide down, then you would do that. So I just wanted to show you how that animation works. So you'd have to build maybe a class that's not active but slide up, and then another one that says slide down, and then you have to build a second animation for that. So let's just leave it at this. It works right now, so it slides up and it slides down because we're applying our active class, and then we are just taking that active class off when we click this close button. When it comes up, you can see that it works for each of our icons here, but it's applying all of the same information to each one. So we can just build out these things. So this is a panel, and this panel is called about, and that's what this is going to say, about. And then we'll build two more. So this is the way that we do it, by adding HTML. And I'll also show you an application specific way that we can do it. And this is going to be favorites. And this one is going to be help. So we need to be able to look and evaluate this click, and we need to attach it to a specific panel so that it brings up a specific panel, because right now they're all bringing up the help panel because that's the last of these panels. Okay, so it's finding in our jQuery, it's finding panel, and it's adding the class active, but it's going to the very last of the panels, and it's adding that class. But what we want is we want specifically to open the bookshelf when we click this specific link. So what we need to do is we need to attach a little bit of data to this. So when the user clicks this, we can evaluate the item that they clicked, and we can say if it has this label, then open this or open this. Okay, so based on the label. So this is sort of a tab structure, so we would say something like data tab, and that's going to be equal to something. So for this first one, we want it to be equal to bookshelf, and I find that whatever this value is, it's really easy to just attach it to whatever your ID is. So just use the same thing as your ID. And then this one is about, and this one is favorites, and this one is help. Now in Pug, this is these are attributes. These are what you would normally see. I'll show you. So you would normally see these as attributes of this list item. So it's like putting data attributes into an HTML tag, and the way that we do that is we use parentheses. And if you wanted to do, if you wanted this to have an href, then you would put a comma and then whatever the next attribute is. So that's how attributes work in Pug. So right now we have this data tab. Let's call this data label. Alright, so the label for this item is going to be bookshelf. When we click on this item right here, we want to collect this information into a variable. We want to use that variable to open this specific panel, not this panel or the next one. So when we click on the footer menu nav item, we need to say a variable of label, and that's going to be equal to this. So we're looking at this footer menu nav item specifically, the one that we clicked, not all of them. So we want to say this dot attribute, and then the attribute is going to be data label. And so we're looking at this attribute of data label. We're getting the value of that label and we're storing it here. So if we click on this icon, then it's going to get this word bookshelf, and it's going to attach that word to this variable. So then we can take that and we can open not all the panels or the last panel, but we can open a very specific panel, this one called bookshelf. So what we do is we come in and we say hashtag, and that's going to be a string, and then we're going to concatenate our label. We're going to concatenate our label variable. So in the end, it's going to look like this. It's going to look like that, because it's going to take this string with no spaces and it's going to concatenate the label. It's going to attach these two things together, sort of like squishing them together, like pieces of, like a sandwich, just squishing them together. So that's how it should come out. And we're going to take that and we're going to add the class of active, which we already know is going to push our panel, this panel, up the page. And because each of these is labeled with a panel class, they're all going to behave exactly the same. And then when we click on panel close, which is something that they all have, you can say they all have panel close, then it's going to take the panels and it's going to remove the class of active. One thing that we can do, because we're going to start clicking different ones and it's going to start opening them on top of each other, I have a plan for that, but I think that's what's going to happen. So we have the first panel is going to be the bookshelf, second panel is going to be about, third panel is going to be favorites, fourth panel is going to be help. Now you can see that they're all opening on top of one another. You can't redo anything. So if I get rid of this, it gets rid of all the panels. So we have one class to clear out all the panels when we click on the panel close. I'm sorry, it's a function. What we want to do is every time that we open a new panel, we want to remove the class of active. We'll try that. It may not be the animation style that we want, because one's going to come down and one's going to go up. So I'll just let you see that. First we want to, before we open a panel, we want to close all of the panels. So everything with the class of panel, it's going to remove that class of active, and then after that it's going to find our specific panel and then open it. So let's open one here, and when we click on this, you can see one goes down and one goes up. This still works here. Okay. So if that sort of style is not what you want, then you can just say we can say panel hide and then remove the class of active. So that's not going to work. We'll just leave it for that. You'd have to reset the CSS inside the JavaScript. That's a little farther than I'm willing to go. But right now, when you click on each of these, you get a nice little slide up, and then they all individually work. If you don't want to click one after another, you want to click the X to get out of them. So right now that's the that's the HTML way. So that's using a different panel, a different menu for every single item. Okay. Now there is a more elegant solution to this, and that's to say, we'll just create a new one, and we'll call this we don't need a specific ID for that. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure these aren't on there. And what we're going to do is every time that we click the footer nav menu item, I'm just going to replace this with a new one. Let's comment that out. So every time you click on this, we still want to get the data label, and we still want to open something particular, but what we want to do is we want to go back to sort of what we had originally done and say we want to open the panel, and we want to add the class of active, so that should open it every time. Okay, but again, it's only opening the panel that we have, and that panel says bookshelf. Now that's not exactly what we want, so if we get rid of this, because when we click on this, we want it to say what is the name of this particular panel that we're looking at. So you can see it doesn't show it. So because we have this label already chosen, we can use this information to fill that in to this spot here, because that's really what we want. We want to have bookshelf, about, favorites, help. And this time what we should do is we should say we need this value to be whatever, however you want it to print out. So bookshelf is not typically one word, and so what we do is we say when we click on this item here, we want to collect this piece of information, and we want to insert that information right here into the panel header, and we can do that pretty easily with JavaScript. So we take the panel header, and then we are just going to change the text. Okay, we don't want to change the HTML. We want to just add text here. And so the text that we're going to use, we could put some sort of text like bookshelf, but every time you click on one of these, it's going to say bookshelf. You see, there's no difference between them because that value is hard coded in. But what we want to do is we want to have what is it called? About. You know, we want this to be about, and we want this to be favorites, and we want this to be help, and this is bookshelf. So the way that we do that is we use our variable, and we just put our variable in there. And our variable is something that we get every time that we click one of these items. So the first one should be bookshelf, and then the second one should be about, and the third one should be favorites, and the fourth one should be help. So all we're doing is we're collecting the data label here, and when we click on this, we're inputting it into this. So it should work every single time. This should be about, and this should be bookshelf. So that's you can see that there's less HTML here. Now that means that this information would have to change as well, and you would should I get into that? Should I not? How far along are we? Okay, we're already pretty far along, so I'm going to save that for a second video, and I can show you how to create data inside of here, so that every time you click these, you wind up with a different set of data here. that gets pulled in and looped through and put into your panel when you open it. And all of this happens pretty instantaneously. JavaScript is very fast in the browser, so a lot of these, even though this function is doing multiple things, it's happening at a very fast pace. And so this is what I originally wanted to show, which is just a sort of slide up menu that you can create as sort of an app-like pattern. So if you're making web apps that you want to look and feel like a native app, then you're able to do that. So in a second video, I'll cover how to create a data structure so that we can use one piece of HTML code here. We can use this one piece of HTML code and we can exchange the data just like we're using data up here on each click. We can actually look and see if it's the bookshelf, like if this label, so we can do an if statement, if this label equals bookshelf, then we do something. We put some data into our list items. And if it's not, if it's about, then we can use a different set. Okay, so sort of an interesting way of doing this, and you're moving more into an application at that point where you have data that's being brought into a shell structure. And all this can be done with vanilla JavaScript. You can do this with any number of frameworks, but this is essentially how web applications or applications work. But I wanted to show you just sort of the old HTML way too, and this is basically like a tab sort of structure, but instead we're sliding up these panels, so you can choose whichever way you feel comfortable with. This one is going to output more, it's going to be weightier on the page, so there's more, not a lot more, but the page is going to be a little bit heavier. This page is going to be a little less heavy, but it requires an investment of JavaScript, so you just have to be willing to make that trade-off. On a small application, that's not a big deal. You can choose either way. On a larger application, you would need to sort of weigh those pros and cons. How heavy is your JavaScript? If this JavaScript doesn't work, then what happens? What's the fallback plan? If JavaScript doesn't work for this, then all of this still gets output to the page. So there's some sort of a screen reader would be able to see this, etc. So just some things to think about, some things to consider whenever you're building applications. How forward thinking do you want it to be? How much do you need to think about older browsers or different types of users? So if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. I'm happy to answer them as best I can. Hopefully this is pretty clear in the way that I structured the tutorial. If not, please let me know. Tried to make the text a little bit bigger, so a user said that it would be helpful to have larger text on the screen, so hopefully it's a little bit easier to read than it has been in the past, and I'll continue to try to make improvements to the video and audio quality and the overall experience of being able to do these things. Not everyone is watching on a large monitor like I'm creating it, so sometimes I forget those things. When you're looking on mobile, it's pretty small. So hopefully this is pretty helpful to you. If it is, give it a thumbs up. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, I would appreciate if you subscribe. If you subscribe, you'll get notifications each time I put out a new video, which I try to do 1 or 2 a week, just on smaller ideas like this. And lately I've been working a lot with APIs and using JavaScript to make a call and get data and things like that. So that's becoming a larger part of my world, and a larger part of the web development world in general, is being able to work with APIs and JSON data in order to bring that data into your applications as more websites turn into apps as opposed to websites only. So, alright, well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.